Welcome back to Sista Brunch, the podcast all about Black women and gender expansive people bringing joy and breaking barriers in entertainment and media. We have added a listener question segment, you all. So now you can leave us a voicemail at 424-587-4870. We will be sharing listener questions on our episodes and also on our social media. So don't be shy, sisters. We want to provide you with all the tools you need to succeed in entertainment and media. We also love your reviews. We're so appreciative. And here's one we got recently from Dope Women who says, so excited, love these voices and the space created for them. Can't wait to hear more stories of Black women in the film industry who are killing it. And it is so true. They are all killing it. So thank you so much, Dope Women. And if you're listening now and you're loving our show, go ahead and subscribe, rate, and leave us a review as well. I'm Fanchon Cox. I'm the founder of TruJuLo Productions. And today's guest is the fabulous, also she's my big sister, Tanya McRae. She's an Emmy Award-winning television producer with more than 3 decades of experience working in news, talk, lifestyle, and reality TV. She graduated from UPenn with a degree in communication, and she is currently an anchor, journalist, and host. And if you live in SoCal, you have seen this woman's face everywhere because she runs the award-winning community affairs program In Focus SoCal for I'll do it again. The award-winning community affairs program In Focus SoCal for Spectrum News in Los Angeles. Welcome, big sister Tanya.
Hello, my darling Fanchon. This is such an honor to be on your show, and I am so in awe of all of the incredible things that you are doing these days. It's really, really spectacular.
Well, in full disclosure, if y'all didn't hear it yet, Tanya is my big sister. We met when I was 14, freshman in high school. And we are so lucky to have a group of friends that we all grew up with together in Cambridge, and all are out here in various areas of the entertainment industry and other industries. And we meet up frequently, but Tanya has always been somebody that she's my shero. She's my everything. And so it's so wonderful to even have something that makes sense for you to be on, that I get to have a conversation with you, but also to uplift who you are and everything you've done and what you're doing, and let other young women know that they can do this too. So,
Fanchon, what's so interesting about our backgrounds is, we don't come from industry families. We both grew up in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and, there's nothing, well, Matt and Ben added a little star factor to our high school, but, a very grounded upbringing. And the fact that we both ended up in LA in the 90s, and we have both, our paths have both led us into the entertainment industry in different areas is really pretty incredible.
it really is. And I think that is a perfect example. And we've had a lot of guests who have talked about their journeys, and very few of us, which happens for Black women, happens for women of color, happens for non-binary folks, is we didn't have access to it. We had no idea how to do it. And even with Matt Damon and Ben Affleck, who we're referring to, who had this trajectory, it still didn't always feel doable for us. And
they weren't famous when we knew them. Matt was about 2 feet tall his freshman year in high school.
Little punks, punk asses. Yes. And so, truly. So on that note, take us back as far as you'd like to go, and tell us about the trajectory that brought you to the fabulousness and all the success that you have now.
Well, a little backstory. So before I made it to Cambridge, where I met you, I was born and raised in New York City on the island of Manhattan to Lucy and Leroy. And when anybody asks me, what are you? What box do you check? I say, well, my daddy's name is Leroy. My mother's name is Lucy. You figure it out. And that kind of, I see their brain spinning, and then they have an aha moment and start laughing. So my mother was white, my father was black. They were both very involved in civil rights movement and a number of movements in New York City, everything from urban development to getting child care for families. And my parents got married in 1966 when it was still illegal in most parts of the United States for interracial marriages. Luckily, New York City did not have that law at the time. And then you and I both celebrate Loving Day every year in honor of our parents and their love and their decision to create a family amidst all of that strife in the 60s. So I grew up in New York City and went to Amherst, Massachusetts for junior high school. My mother was going to get her PhD. I was 10 years old. And the bribe to get me from New York City to Amherst, Massachusetts was that I could ride all the horses I wanted to. Because in third grade, I had started riding horses thanks to my teacher at a school in Brooklyn. So moved to Amherst, Massachusetts.
I don't think I knew that. I love that.
Yes.
Also, I just have to say, Tanya is quintessential New York. Like, Tanya is somebody who goes out and enjoys herself. So getting this even at that age, getting her, I know that must have been hard, but I love that it was horses.
It was very challenging. It was horses that drew me. And it was really difficult. We were there for 5 years. And, to go from New York City to a Western Massachusetts, New England town, where there were very, very few Black people of color of any kind. Bill Cosby and his 5 kids lived in Amherst and went to my school. Those were really one of the few families that lived in Amherst, Massachusetts. And by the time I was in 9th grade, I had started going to Cambridge to visit a family friend who lived there and her 2 kids that were my age. You both know them both, Marguerite Hicks and Che Hicks, that went to high school with us. And by 9th grade, I told my mom, listen, I can't stay in this Hoboken town anymore. I have to go to a city. I am moving to Cambridge. I'll stay in a Holiday Inn for high school if I need to, but I have got to get out of here.
That's time.
Sometimes that's what you got to do. So I was 15, so I got to go. And my mother had just remarried, and my stepfather is an artist, and they both realized that it was what was best for me, that I really was struggling living in that kind of a small environment. So we moved to Cambridge, and I started high school my sophomore year in Cambridge, at Cambridge Reinvent High School. And it was so eye-opening, Fanchon. And as someone who is also mixed, you can appreciate, for me, in my teen years, going through the struggles of being biracial in a time when people didn't know what that meant. They didn't interracial, biracial, being mixed.
Mulatto,
a lot of people didn't, right, which I hated that term, did not understand what that meant. But Cambridge had a lot of interracial families. So it was, easy for me to sort of find my place. I still went through my identity crisis, however. In high school, I identified Black, and my white mother and my Jewish stepfather were not a part of my image. And so when we would go anywhere, to the mall or to a restaurant, I would walk like 10 feet behind them. I thank them for tolerating me during those years, but I did not want to be seen with them. I wanted to be someone who really embraced my Black heritage and Black culture. So in high school, and meeting you, and we both got involved in a lot of fashion shows, and I was on the basketball team. I was the starting center at Cambridge Reinvent Latin High School. The school that created Pat Ewing.
Sonata can decide whether or not we're going to keep this, but I have to share the fashion show story, because you can just look at the two of us and see the difference between us in terms of who knows how to do makeup and hair and who doesn't. But we were in a fashion show together, and Tanya, she kind of helped us. She knew what she was doing, and so
I got into makeup when I was about 13 and never looked back.
But then somebody told me, just put your hands straight down and just walk. And so thank God at those days we didn't have iPhones or any, nobody took video. But Tanya got up there and just swiveled and shook, and everybody was like, that's a model. This one, she can take her ass and go do something else. Well, I also love this. I love that this is one of the most, I think you're sharing some more personal stories, which is so nice, because often people focus on career, and that's probably how I lead the questions. But I also wonder if so many things that you're talking about led you into storytelling. like this, being in new environments where you weren't necessarily comfortable and you had to remake yourself, or your period where you rejected your white family or kept them at bay. Like, do you think those were planting seeds for you as a storyteller?
Well, what was interesting for me, so in fifth grade in Amherst, I was in the lowest level reading class. And I think I might have been slightly dyslexic. I was never diagnosed as such, but there was a Black teacher in Amherst. Her name was Marcia Hargrove. I will never forget her, because that summer between fifth and sixth grade, she told my mother, "You have to find books that Tanya will enjoy reading and immerse her in reading. She just needs to read." And that summer, my mother sat me down. First of all, I discovered Judy Blume, and then got into reading. I think I had about 5 books at any given time, and became obsessed with reading. And in 1 year, I went from the lowest level reading class in fifth grade to the highest level reading class in sixth grade. And one of the things that did for me, in addition to expanding my repertoire, was I also realized that I was much better talking in classes and writing essays than I was at multiple choice, testing, or in math, where you just had to check a box and there was one right answer, right? For me, it was, if I talked in a class, I generally got an A. So that was something where I realized I could tell stories, I could have conversations about, European history, ask the teachers questions. Oftentimes the teacher's like, "Okay, Tanya, you can let somebody else talk." But so I realized in high school that I did much better in classes where you had to have conversations and pose questions and have discussions about topics than doing multiple choice, exams. And the storytelling part of those discussion classes was really what got me into, being one of those people that was comfortable in front of a crowd, number one. And 2, didn't mind debating. So that sort of set things up for when I went to college. And again, I went to University of Pennsylvania. Everyone knows it as the school where Wharton resides. But I was sort of trying to find my way. I changed majors 5 times. I started out wanting to be a zoologist. Going to San Diego Zoo and working with the babies was my dream job. I always loved animals. I wanted to be a veterinarian until I realized that required blood and math. It's like, ooh, that was not up my alley. Eventually at Penn, I ended up with communications as my major. Yes. And really one of my senior project was that I did with 2 other students was about student apathy in our era. And this was in the 80s. And I had the honor of interviewing Jesse Jackson, Angela Davis, Abby Hoffman, and Bobby Seale for my senior project at Penn. And I was the interviewer, and my other 2 student cohorts, one was the producer, one was the photographer, but I was the one who did the talking, shockingly enough. And that was kind of the beginning for me. And I ended up deciding that I was either going to go into news or public relations. I remember, Banton, I sent out 200 resumes and cover letter. This is, mind you, the era, the dinosaur era before email and the internet, right? So I sent out 200 letters for jobs. I ended up with 7 job interviews. They were all in New York City. And the job offer that I took was to be a vacation relief assignment desk assistant at ABC, World News Tonight, and Nightline, which was just incredible, not too shabby. And a very good friend of mine, I'm going to give a shout out to Charmaine Dixon, who is also a fellow Bostonian. She went to Wesleyan a year ahead of me. And she was one of I think there were 12 assignment desk assistants, and there were only 2 who were Black. It was Charmaine and another woman. And Charmaine helped me get my first interview at ABC News. So shout out to Charmaine for reaching back over the wall and helping me get my first job at ABC News. And that was the beginning.
Oh my gosh. Okay. So a couple things. One, I think it's so important to point out, and we've had guests talk about this before, when you when you find something that happens to you naturally or you do naturally, like you being a talker in classes and potentially some teachers trying to shut that down, if you find that thing, there are jobs for you. And this
Right.
is right, like this
Absolutely.
is, and we were really lucky. I mean, Tanya and I, the part of the reason we all get together frequently, those of us from Cambridge, is because we had this really special, encouraging environment, and they were good at knowing those, bringing those things out of
Nurturing
us,
that.
nurturing
And
those things.
and what was beautiful about Cambridge Expansion was that because it was a place of both artists and intellects,
Yeah,
our families and our teachers and our community really did encourage us as children and as teenagers to find ourselves, and really knew we're wise enough not to try and say, you're going to be a doctor, you're going to be a lawyer, but to allow us to grow into the things that really we were naturally inclined to.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I love it. Okay. So now cut to, you are basically running things with, and I had the opportunity to see Tanya at the beginning of COVID. I got to drop off some groceries and you were doing a story, and it was amazing to watch you doing the story. And then also you've interviewed me, you've interviewed some friends. So we want to know what a typical day in the life of a producer, especially on a show like In Focus SoCal. What does a typical day look like for you?
So let me just back up, Vincent, and say that in 2018, I was going through an existential crisis.
Yes.
I was working on a lot of reality shows as a co-executive producer, field producer, which I had been doing on and off for basically 30 years as a producer. I'd say 75% of my career has been behind the camera and 25% in front of the camera. So the majority of it I've spent as a producer. And in 2018, I just didn't want to do it anymore. The shows I was working on, I just were not fulfilling for me. Yeah. And I was trying to figure out what next, right? So what am I going to do when I grow up? Although I was already at that point 50 years old. And I decided that I needed to find something that was going to give me a sense of purpose. And I got onto website Indeed.com, which I had never used before because most production positions are not even posted. And if they are, it's usually after they've already hired someone, but they have to do it for legal reasons. And I went on there looking at PR jobs, communications jobs. And finally, I saw this new posting for a new 24-hour network that was going to launch in LA called Spectrum News One. And it was going to be the West Coast sister station of New York One. Yeah. Which has been around since 1993.
You can't get New York out
no,
of you. The New York kept
you kept pulling me back in. I tried to get away, it kept pulling me back in. So I applied for 3 jobs when I saw this listing. I applied for an executive producer of news, a producer for original programming, and for an MMJ, a multimedia journalist position in the San Fernando Valley. I was living in Sherman Oaks at the time. So I applied for all 3, just threw them at the wall and said, let's see. And I got a call the next day. And I was brought in by a woman named Kater Lee, who was the new vice president of news for Spectrum here in LA. And she was about my age, and we had a very similar background, and which is unusual for news. Oftentimes people start in news and they stay in news. And we both had done a lot of original programming, from news magazine shows to talk shows to lifestyle shows, entertainment shows. So she appreciated that part of my background. Yes. Whereas I think if I had been talking to a traditional news person, they probably would have had doubts about the fact that I had not had a straight path in news. Interesting. And of all those positions, she hired me as an MMJ. Now, for those of you who don't know what it means to be an MMJ, a multimedia journalist, that means that you are a one-man band. Ultimately, you have 7 jobs in one. You are your own researcher. You are your own, assignment desk operators. So you have to find your stories, you have to research them, you have to find characters, you have to coordinate the shoots, you have to go on the shoots, you have to shoot everything yourself. So we were shooting with Sony 280Z cameras within 6 months. Of course, I had a torn rotator cuff, had to have surgery for that. I don't suggest anyone being 51 years old and being an MMJ, by the way. That is challenging. But I knew that if I wanted to get back into the game, I was going to have to reinvent myself. So I spent 2 years. So you have to shoot You have to edit, you have to write your own stories, you have to upload them. You also have to write a web article. You have to, in your contract, you have to be on social media. So all of those things, and you had to do the 3 stories a week. So I worked basically 24/7 for 2 years straight, Fanchon. And it was
we didn't
intense.
See her
No, you did not.
at all
for those 2 years, you did not. From mid 2018 to mid 2020. And then the pandemic hit. And, the world stopped. But of course, news never stops. And during a crisis or a pandemic, we were on overdrive. And during the very beginning of the pandemic, as you mentioned, bringing me food, I got really sick and I thought I had COVID. And we weren't sure of all the symptoms at the time, but I had basically everything but the fever. So they started the public COVID testing, and I was in the Valley. So the first day I went to get tested at Handsome Dam. And before I went, my news director called me and said, Tanya, would you be okay documenting your journey? Now, mind you, I am half dead to the world, trying to get myself dressed to drive to the Handsome Dam to this show.
We didn't know anything about the pandemic. We were like, is she dying?
Right. We had no idea what was happening. Right. So I put my iPhone on my dashboard, Fanchon, as I was driving, and I'm talking to the iPhone because there's no traffic anywhere. It was surreal. And so I had to document my journey. I documented my testing, waiting for days for the outcome. And ultimately I tested negative, but quite honestly, we don't really know because I tested myself. I had no idea what I was doing. I think I may have had COVID, although a few months later, I did not have the antibodies. So who knows? But the summer of 2020, in the middle of the pandemic, I then got promoted to be the anchor and host of our public affairs show, In Focus. And this has just taken both my career and my life experience to a new level. And I say this because, this is just one of those things, it is what it is, where, reporters are the ones who are out there, boots on the ground in the streets. But anchors are the ones who get a lot more visibility and a lot more of the accolades. But what's unique about my position is I'm the only one on the show. I mean, I have a production team behind the camera, but I not only anchor the show, but I also go out and do stories every week, and I write those stories, and I do interviews with people, and I'm in the studio, and I'm on location. It is the best of all possible worlds, Fanchon. I have never had a job where I can say I am 100% completely fulfilled, and I am in that place now.
Y'all,
I am
Tanya,
in that place.
And
I've had my struggles. This is not to say I have not had my struggles. I've had many.
Many.
But I have found my place.
And I think it speaks to several things. One is your kind of knowing somewhat the path that you want to go on, and also being flexible. And even when you talk about the 3 different jobs that you applied for, knowing that you could do any one of those 3, which to someone else might look like, oh no, you should only apply for the EP role, right? Like that you could have done any of those. The fact that you had the skills and learned the skills quickly took the time.
I've been in fields. Yeah. Exactly. I've been in the field for, many, many years, and I've been beside the, camera operators, and I've been aside the directors of photography, and I've spent thousands of hours in editing bays with a professionally trained editor, but I had never touched the buttons myself until this job. So I had to learn how to use a professional camera. I had to learn Adobe Premiere. The book is about this thing. And what's the reason I bring my age up in this is because most of the MMJs that were coming in were in their 20s.
Sure.
A few were in their 30s.
Because they have a little studio in their pocket.
Right, but they started this from the beginning. I had not. So it really was a unique learning curve mid-career for me to make this switch. But as I said, I knew that in order to keep myself relevant, I was going to have to learn a new skill set. So I did.
Your background's gorgeous. We love the orchids. We love everything that's going on. There's something there that also is sparkly and shining, and I feel like we need to address what is that love.
Her name is Emmy.
Hey,
And she is my
girl.
roommate, my only roommate. But isn't she
Is she
pretty?
real
I like to
pretty?
pat. Let's see.
Oh.
Oh, good girl. That's Emmy, and I won her in 2015 for Outstanding Lifestyle Show. I was a senior producer on the Oprah Winfrey Network show Homemade Simple, and we were actually nominated 3 times. And unfortunately, I went the first time that we were nominated with my mom. We didn't get it. The next year, I was working on a show for a Lifetime in Jackson, Mississippi, a show called Bring It, a dance competition show. And while we're shooting this huge competition, I see on social media one of my coworkers, oh my God, we won. I didn't even know the Emmys was happening that weekend. And in the middle, someone said, Tanya, you're an Emmy winner. And I screamed,
Yeah.
100 people are looking at me.
Like, what's
That's how I found out that I'd won an Emmy. So
yes.
she makes me very happy.
She's
And she
gorgeous.
makes, the roller coaster ride of being in this industry, it's validation. For sure. It's validation.
Well,
For sure.
let's talk about that. So, validation, where we get it from, being Black women, being mixed Black women, things that you've talked about in your identity. What do those mean for you at work? How have those been part of your journey or not?
Oh, absolutely.
How do they come in?
When I was a producer, so I went from ABC News as an assignment desk assistant to being a field coordinator for a local station in New York, WPIX, and working in the community affairs department. And then my third job was as an associate producer for a talk show on Lifetime, and it was called Attitudes. And they used to kind of parody it on Saturday Night Live because it was really one of the first talk shows, and it was 2 women who were gossiping and chit-chatting, and they did a lot of skits on Saturday Night Live for that. But on that show was my first job where I kind of just became the Black producer of the show, because we'd have, story meetings and brainstorming for who we're going to interview. And I was always the only one in the room who would raise my hand and mention, why don't we interview this person? Why don't we interview that person? And the first guest that I was going to be producing for them ended up being Albie Shore. Most people never even heard of him, but he was a star.
What you mean?
Exactly.
Yes, we love
and I was so excited, Fanchin, and 2 hours before we we're going to start taping, I get a call from Albie Shore. I'm like, yes, how can I help you, sir? And he said, I'm so sorry, Tanya, I'm not going to be able to make it. My girlfriend is in the hospital having a baby. That was Kim Porter. And I'll get back to you. So, but from that show and my Albie Shore experience, I went on to bring many other Black entertainers and well-known people onto the show. But from that show, I realized that was going to be a role that I was going to be playing in my professional life. And I think I have worked on 56 different shows over my career now. Now, mind you, my mom's always like, is that a good thing to have a 4-page resume, honey? As I tell her, in the production world, oftentimes you can work 2, 3, 5, 6 jobs in a year because they're all, some are a few weeks, some are a few months. But many, not all, but most of the jobs that I've had, I have ended up being the Black producer. And over the years, there have been more of us in positions, and I've worked on shows that had a Black cast, for instance, like Bring It, or I did a show called Atlanta Royalty, which was basically the Black version of Toddlers and Tiaras. But I definitely, was put in that niche and accepted it willingly because I felt I had a responsibility. And if I wasn't there, folks would not have gotten on.
Wouldn't see. Yeah, we talk about this a lot personally because our family from Cambridge, again, this is a really close-knit group of people. A lot of us are also light-skinned. A lot of us are doing well, and a lot of us are the ones who can speak that way in the rooms when we're the only ones. And instead of their seeing us as a threat, they're like, oh, good. Thank you. We've got, they're
a bit more receptive.
They're more receptive, and not always. I mean, in the same thing, sometimes in all black rooms, we are not as appreciated. Right. And I get that too. Right. So I'm always curious too about your path. You seem to have been embraced beautifully, even though the challenges are there. And I wonder if you feel like, are there soft skills maybe that you have, or hard skills that make it so that the way you put it, even the way you talk about the importance of inclusion helps you get it done.
Mm. Well, you and I are in the unique position, Fanchon, of being comfortable in most worlds and most situations. I am
Because of
comfortable if I'm in a
exposure.
room filled with white people. I am comfortable in a room filled with black people. I am comfortable in rooms filled with all different races of people because I feel that I am a person of many different identities. When I was younger, they did not have the opportunity. They did not give you the opportunity when you were filling out an application to check multiple boxes. And my mother will talk about when I was 8 years old, having to fill out an application, and they wanted race, and I checked black and I checked white. And the woman said, I think we were at a doctor, well, you can't check two, you have to check one. And I said, okay, well, which one of my parents do you want me to disown, my mother or my father? And she looked at me and I was like, I'm 50% of both. So what do you want me to do? And that was kind of the beginning for me, Fanchon, of identifying as someone who was interracial, who was mixed. And that has always been a part of my identity. I am not going to disown my mother or my father to make anybody else feel better or feel at ease about what box to put me in, because I am both Lucy's daughter and I am Leroy's daughter. And I think in terms of my approach in a work environment, I make it pretty clear early on that I am a multiracial person, and that is who Tanya McRae is. And I don't think in any way do I deliberately try and push that down anyone's throat, but in terms of the content that I produce or the stories I tell or the perspective that I give. I am very objective in the work that I do at Spectrum News. I do not bring my own political slant or biases or feelings about stuff. I try and, I told you, I am Switzerland when it comes to that stuff professionally, although my personal experiences absolutely play a role in how I tell stories or the stories that I choose to tell. There's no way around that. And culturally, yes, I identify more Black. I spent a lot more time with my father's side of the family than I did my mother's side growing up. But, she was a single mother by the time I was 2 years old. And I was raised by a tribe of women in New York City. And my white mother really surrounded herself primarily with Black and Jewish women. And so I grew up in a multicultural world in that way. And I think I bring that to the jobs that I have right now. My executive producer is Korean American. My producer photographer is Chinese American. My editor is a white man. And my production assistant is Latina American. And we work together so beautifully because we all bring different perspectives and issues and things that are important in our personal lives to the work that we do. And we are all appreciative of each other. And I think that is a huge part of, and the work that you do, Fanchon, and the Inclusion Writer is, about acknowledging and accepting people for who they are, what they bring to the table. Yes. And that is what this country is built on. Yeah. And it makes me crazy right now, the racism and the anti-Semitism and the homophobia, just all of it is just absolutely exhausting. And it really is.
Be steeped in it daily, and that must be so hard. In fact, my goodness. So we have two standard questions that I'm going to ask, and then I'm thinking that Sista Brunch needs to add just a standard health and wellness question, because you're also another role model for me around that as well. But a question that we ask our guests to share as much as you're comfortable. We like to share about salary ranges, especially so that if our sisters who listen are in a position to negotiate their salaries, they even have a sense of where to start, or at least where to find out where to start. So, especially with all the different kinds of roles you've had, could you tell us about salaries that you've received, numbers if you want, or generals, and salary? Yes, salary.
So salary is, it's such an amorphous thing in the TV world, especially the unscripted TV world, especially in the cable TV world. And for me, most of the jobs that I had for many years were in cable, Lifetime, OWN, Travel Channel, Medical Channel, Oxygen, just a lot of different cable channels. So when I was a field producer, the average salary was usually $2,500 to $3,000 a week. I will tell you, one of the reasons that I moved out of that was I had that same salary for 15 years. And it still is not going up much. And what has changed is, you would think as you go up, that would go up, but it has stayed the same. And the problem is there's so much competition.
Right.
And what's happened in, the unscripted world, and I'm going to be very specific about that, because the scripted world, quite honestly, is even more competitive than unscripted TV, but pays 10 times more.
Partly why.
Exactly.
Sure.
I mean, I know people who are making $30,000 a week. That has never been in my stratosphere.
As producers in unscripted? In
No, in scripted, exactly.
Okay.
As a co-executive producer in unscripted, I was ordinarily making about $4,000 a week. And one of the things that I did in 2015 was I started my own S Corp, Amazonia Productions. And you know the backstory to my Amazonia nickname, really quick. I was in a talent show when Fanton and I were at Cambridge Region Latin. I did a song with some fellow students for the Purple Rain, and people started calling me Apollonia. And then the lead singer said, "She's not Apollonia, she's Amazonia." Yeah. And that became the name of my production company. I embraced it, being an Amazon. Yes, I am 6 feet tall. I'm proud of it. So Amazonia Productions. So I created my own production company, so I would get paid through that. And then I sort of went the other direction again when I said I had to make myself relevant again and go down a different track. Going into news is a whole nother world, and news does not pay a lot. Unless you are a network anchor working for World News Tonight, or working for CNN or MSNBC, working for one of the biggies, you are not going to make a killing and end up in a mansion working in certainly not local news or cable news, but you can eventually make your way up. And I think one of the things I'm learning now is many of these companies have 401ks that you do not get as an independent contractor, and many companies will match what you put into your 401k every year, which is a huge benefit. But I would also tell people that they need to find ways to start their own savings, because those of us who live and work in the freelance world, it's a whole nother beast. And my Social Security is going to be really small, so I will probably be working until I drop. But that's one of the benefits of doing, having your own plan. I would pay for an accountant to help me navigate that world. And then, when you get into, again, in my world, the either network news, or if you become an anchor, the salaries become much more negotiable because you are the face of a particular program, whether it's the morning news or like me working on our public affairs show. It is a different responsibility that comes with that as well, but it's
like looking cute all day, every day.
That is a work.
That public, that's, I would imagine there's some pressure there. People know you. People recognize you out on the street. It's
really very funny. I mean, ironically, I was a reporter for Spectrum News for 2 years, and when I became an anchor, MMJ is my official title, and then host of In Focus SoCal, I was getting new invitations to events, and there's a different visibility that comes with, being the face of a show and having your name on a show. But it's an incredible honor, and I take it very seriously.
Yes,
Um,
you do.
I take that responsibility seriously, but it's also, an opportunity for me to, I give voice to a lot of different people who wouldn't have one. And that is probably one of the biggest honors of having a show. And, Spectrum was built brilliant when they bought Time Warner and relaunched Spectrum News across the country and made us the default channel. So if you have Spectrum Cable in 2018 and you turned on your TV, Channel 1 was there.
Yes.
And we got a lot of complaints the first 6 months of, I don't hate when they do that. I don't want that channel. And within 6 months, Fanchon, people would stop me on the street and say, I actually really like the stories you guys do. I leave that channel on. And it has stayed that way. I had a great conversation with our Vice President, Kater Lee, when I interviewed with her in 2018. And one of the things that she said to me was, if you watch local news in Los Angeles on any given day or night, you would wonder why anyone lives here. Between the car chases and the crime and the killings and the drama and the chaos, that is often top of the news hour. That is what you see. And she said, we're not doing any of that. It is going to be character-driven stories about what people are doing every day and all the reasons we love living where we live. And we have a balance of that. It's not a matter of everything is,
perfect
unicorns and puppy dogs.
Yes.
But it's looking at what life is like, both the good and the bad. But not the news that you're going to forget about, and not the news that's going to scare you into not wanting to leave your house every day.
I'm so glad you put it that way. I had never thought about it. Truly, I will admit that I'm at the point where I'm like, I check Twitter news feed in the morning
to see what's happening out there.
But it's when I see your face on your social, because and Tanya's so great and probably has to also about posting the stories she's covering on social, and it draws me in every time, because I feel like I'm going to feel uplifted, I'm going to feel joyful, and at least I'm going to get an angle that focuses on the positive, even though there are challenges there, and it's local. And you just said too, the opportunity to give voice to folks that otherwise we may not hear from, or the history. Right. I love you were at what is it, the beach, Howard, what is the beach?
Right, we were at Bruce's Beach. Fanchon, let me tell you, with Bruce's Beach, my photographer is the one who pitched that in 2020. And we started following that story. I was like, wow, I've never heard of this.
Been here this
Let's
whole time,
look into this.
Yes.
So we followed that story for 2 years. And when the legislation was changed that allowed, and this involved both, Senator Stephen Bradford, the LA County Board of Supervisors making decisions, Governor Gavin Newsom coming to Manhattan Beach to sign new legislation that would allow the county to give this family back the land that was basically stolen from them in 1929. And it was so historic. So I did that story. And I had a friend a few months ago who sent me a message. She's like, why are you a part of my law class? I was like, what? And she was taking a class here in Los Angeles, one of the community colleges. And that day they were doing a story about local news and, changing the conversation about history. And they showed one of my stories about Bruce's Beach in that law class. And I was just blown away. But to be able to give light to them, that became a national story. And we were one of the first to do a story about what happened at Bruce's Beach. And most recently, we did a story about the Ebony Beach Club in Santa Monica, which, same thing, eminent domain land was taken from a Black man by the city under the auspices of eminent domain for a parking lot for the Civic Center. It was never built. It's now the land of the Viceroy Hotel, which sits upon it on the corner of Ocean Avenue and Pico Boulevard. But Kavon Ward went on to, from that was not her full-time job. She was just so inspired when she heard about what had happened at Bruce's Beach that she made it her mission. And 2 years later, she now has is doing this full-time. She quit her day job and created an organization called Where Is My Land? And right now, Fanchon, within months of creating that organization, she has 600 cases on the docket across the country of Black families. So it's pretty incredible.
Yes. I think like that's reparations. Like that's one of the first, like both of those cases are clear examples of reparations. And you are there, I guess. that's why I feel it's so important for you to be here, Tanya, to because you're sharing where you're sharing the power that you have in being an MMJ, right? That like as much as it's also a whole lot of work and a
Oh
whole
yeah.
lot of experience that you need, look at the power you have in doing this role and determining what the stories are going to be
Mm-hmm.
because you're the person who learned how to control the camera, then you're controlling the lighting. So then when you have darker skinned people, you make sure they get lit well. Like
Absolutely.
when you're in charge of all of that, and here you are doing that as an example for everybody. So I just love you. Okay.
Oh, thank you.
So Tanya, we've got a Sista Brunch question, and this
All
is
right.
from Lisa Crest again. Thanks, Lisa. She's inspiring. She's an aspiring filmmaker, and she wants to know. Okay, and here's her question. So then we're going to play it, and then I'll just let you know. She wants to know, how do you see good representation in media? Uh, it's something I feel the industry needs to work more on. So I want to hear your perspective on representation in media and film, and how can we make our industry better?
I think inclusive representation means that you have to create your own content, number one. You can't expect someone who does not understand what life is like in your community, in your world, in your family, to write about it. You have to write about it. And the challenge is getting people who don't know about your world, so to speak, to think that it's important. And that has been the consummate issue that Hollywood has faced for many, 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 many years. And it is changing. It is changing as we get people of color in studio executive positions, as we get them running networks, running news organizations, running production facilities, running, the streaming channels. It is a matter of getting the gatekeepers to represent the rest of us as well, because those are the folks who give the green light. So, as much as it is important for us to see representation on camera, on our TVs, on the movie, on a movie screen, it is also really important that people work towards becoming one of the gatekeepers. And it is essential because those are the people who greenlight projects. And those are the people who either say yes or say no to whether something is going to get the money and get the distribution. So number one, it is being willing to be a creator. And Fanchen, I think one thing that you have always been very involved in is people on all sides of the entertainment and media world, in front of the camera and behind the camera, the gatekeepers and the creatives. We have to tell our own stories in order for people to even understand that it's important. I just happened the other day, it was like a Sunday, and turned on the TV, and what is it, Millionaire Slumdog?
Oh, Slumdog Millionaire. Yeah,
Slumdog.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
So I was watching TV a few weeks ago, and Slumdog Millionaire came on. That was one of the best movies ever made. And you would not think that a movie about, children in India who were orphans and struggling to survive would be something that would capture the mass audience's attention. But it was a story about humanity, and it was a story about, finding your way through the world despite all of the challenges when you have nothing, and, about children that are going through this. And it is a universal story. It's a universal struggle. So I think while there are aspects to our experience, to the experience of so people in so many different demographic groups, although when people say, what is your race? I say, I'm a member of the human race, as are you. So we are brothers and sisters. Is understanding that there are stories that are universal, where you can add the nuances and the layers of, whether you are Black or whether you are Asian American or whether you are Native American, or if you are from another country and come to America, or whether you don't live in America at all. Making these stories of interest to people in their humanity, I think, is really important.
Okay, so Tanya, you and young Tanya are sitting down for a Sista Brunch.
Okay.
What are you both eating? What are you both drinking? And what do you tell young Tanya?
Still, my absolute favorite is good Chinese food. Needs to be Szechuan. Little Tanya loved hot and sour soup and dumplings. Big Tanya, I was big back then too. Tall Tanya still loves hot and sour soup and soy sauce. And I literally, anything that has soy sauce on it, I'm happy with. So whether it is Japanese food, Thai food, Chinese food, Korean food, Vietnamese food, Little Tanya and Big Tanya.
You're taking Little Tanya to the
Hong Kong and Harvard Square. I cannot tell you, I passed up these school lunches for Hong Kong lunch many, many, many times. I think the thing that Big Tanya would tell Little Tanya is to slow down. I was always so eager to be grown. You know, I wanted to get out in the world and I wanted to do things and I wanted to be independent. And I was frantic. When I was in elementary school, I wanted to be in junior high school. When I was in junior high school, I wanted to be in high school. When I was in high school, I wanted to be in college. When I was in college, I wanted to get out into the working world. And I think Big Tanya would tell her, honey, adulting is really hard. Enjoy the fact that your only responsibility today is to do that math worksheet and go to basketball practice and then come home and have dinner with your parents, watch a little TV, read a book, and enjoy the life that you have today. And it would be to be present, because I was always looking ahead and looking at what's next. And, you know, honestly, it's brought me a lot of anxiety and stress and angst over the years of always looking at what's next. So, you know, I get a producer job. Okay, when am I getting my co-executive producer job? I get a co-EP job. Okay, when am I getting my executive producer job? You know, I was always looking for the next. I accomplished this, great, got that checked off, what's next? And it really is to appreciate where you are today. That is a life lesson. And when I have, it took me a long time to get to the point of realizing being present and appreciating now. I think the pandemic was a game changer for me, Fanchon, in terms of my mentality of appreciate today, because you really have no idea what tomorrow is going to bring, and to be present and to accept things as they are. Not what you want them to be, not what they could be, not what they should be, but accept things as they are. And when you work within that realm, you'll be amazed at the weight that is lifted off your shoulders. So I would say to be present and to appreciate what you have today.
Thank you for being my friend for so long, and my sister,
love you,
my
Fanchon Cox.
mentor. I love you too, Tanya, and I'm so glad to be able to share you with all of our Sista Brunch listeners and inspire them and let them know to come full circle, Tanya, and to see you say you are living your dream is incredible and so inspiring. So thank you.
Sweetheart. Love you.
Love you too.